Welcome to another edition of Market Impact Insights, your podcast source for business leadership perspectives to help your business grow. Hear from experts in marketing, sales, business strategy, and more, with practical advice for business success. Make sure you won't miss the latest episodes by visiting marketimpactnow.com. Now, here's your host, Dan Albaum.
Welcome back to another amazing episode of Market Impact Insights. As leaders, there's something that we all face. There's a challenge. We're going to get into a real conversation today, and it's about really mindset and perspective around giving ourselves some grace, not falling into the trap of perfectionism. That's a road to burnout. And my guest today, Katie Virtue, is a coach, speaker, and recovering perfectionist, so she knows what I'm talking about here, who empowers leaders of scaling businesses to break free from this 100% perfectionist trap. She has a signature framework we're going to talk about, the 70% playbook, and it's helping so many people embrace this idea of bold balance. That's the art of thriving without burning out. You can give more, and you can learn, and you can develop, and you can really play the long game. And it just takes you to a whole nother level. I can't wait to talk with Katie. You know, she's a hockey player for over 30 years, and she thought that giving 100% constantly was the only way to succeed. And she now realizes that mindset was not sustainable. And so now helping others, she's going to get all of us really looking at this the right way. Katie, welcome to Market Impact Insights.
Thank you, Dan. Excited to be here and dive into what all of this means for leadership.
So, Katie, what originally sparked your interest in really focusing around coaching and helping others and really developing leaders?
So I hit that point in my career, like probably many of us do, where you are given your first leadership opportunity. And I remember not, going at it as well as I probably should have, because you're given that first opportunity to be a leader, to be a manager, but you're not given a lot of training or time and attention to that. It's just all of a sudden, here's people that you manage. And I heard it the other day described well in terms of coaching and leadership and shifting from I to we today. And, I've gone on that journey where at first I was, here's what I am accomplishing as a leader, to here's what we are accomplishing. And then, really diving into more of the coaching aspect and focusing on they. And so I think, it really became that view of what's the ripple effect that I can create by coaching others and shifting all the way to they. The other component too is a leader of mine introduced me to the framework JDI, judgment, drive, and influence. And something used in many organizations when they are looking at people who might be on a leadership path. And when we went through it, I realized that I was very high on drive. So hence that, going after that 100%. But what I didn't realize was because I was so high on drive, it was impacting my judgment and my influence. And so worked through that with my coach, my leaders, and thought, this is something that I really want to then be able to bring to others in a way that, I can make it relatable and tied to, things that drive my purpose. And then, tied into all of this for many of us, I'm sure that our leaders or are involved in coaching, just that fulfillment of helping others, where you get to that point where you say, it's not as fulfilling when it's just me achieving things. It's fulfilling when I'm helping others to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's this idea of putting others first. And, you talked about this first time manager, first time leader experience. And, I know you've seen it and I've seen it too. What's interesting is sometimes we fall into this assumption that someone who's excelling as an individual contributor, we just assume that when we change the title and we put them into that role, that they're just going to just seamlessly step in and be a good people leader. Now, many times that can be the case, but sometimes that's just not the case. It doesn't always translate. So there's some nuances, isn't there, to shift from individual performance and all the things that go into that success, and then now you're responsible for team performance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different skill set, and to your point, you can be accomplished in a skill in a certain function, but then it is very different when you have that role. And I think a big thing too that shifts is not just the skill set of being, a coach, a leader, but then you really have to start adapting to how others communicate, how others work. Whereas in that individual contributor role, you can more often kind of work within your own approach and framework. And now you really need to adjust to the way others think and communicate.
Mm-hmm. And when you reflect back on your own journey so far, including the shift to really a more entrepreneurial path as you're developing leadership teams, what has been some of your biggest learning, and have there been surprises for you along the way?
Yeah, so I like to talk about how I've redefined my view of performance throughout my journey. And very early on in those hockey playing days, I used to view performance as, based on that perfection. So am I giving 100%? Am I, being perfect in every shift that I have at every practice and in winning games. It was so much about that perfection piece. And when I reflected back on that, I realized, it wasn't just that strive for perfection that was all part of performance. And when I got into my early career, I then was all focused on productivity. How much could I accomplish? Could I say yes, take it on, and achieve it and accomplish it? And that gets you so far. But I, started to realize that just being in that wheel of churning out results or achievements was really not the type of performance that I wanted for the long term. That was sustainable. And then in my next shift, it started to focus more on feeling like I had to operate at 100%. So yes, there was that, perfection from the early days, but now it was, working so much. And when you shift to working remote as well, it can be easy to fall into that. Well, I'm just going to, pop back into my office and in the evening and answer some emails and get some more work done. And when I reflected on all of that, I realized, I was trying to go after perfection and productivity and working as much as I could and trying to do all these things. And the first thing, I when I reflected and realized was, why am I even doing all of this? So that question of purpose.
Yeah.
And when someone asked me that, I'm like, gosh, I've gone all these years, throughout this career and haven't stepped back to think about why. And in doing that reflection, the other piece was thinking about progress and how I wasn't celebrating any progress. I was only celebrating if there was that, end goal, end achievement, and how much I was missing in celebrating that progress along the way. And sort of tied to that, I think, a surprise for me, one I've just had in more recent months as I've been on this entrepreneurial path, as you mentioned, is that on some of the toughest days, what actually ends up energizing me is reaching out and lifting up others. So it was something I started to try when I was having some of those tough days, and I thought, you know what, I've been meaning to reach out and share with someone how they said something recently that I took away, or I've been thinking about this person, and I did that outreach, and I realized how good it felt to do that, and then just the response they gave around, oh wow, I'm glad you called that out. Thank you for pointing that out. And so that's kind of now one of my go-tos is when it feels like tough times, think about, how I can lift up others because that's going to give me energy.
Yeah, isn't that amazing when we are maybe at a point where we would benefit so much from others lifting us up that if we take the proactive step of lifting others, it's therapeutic, right? It's maybe it just makes you feel better as you're talking about. And so the idea of giving rather than taking, in this case, the giving ultimately gives you the gift back.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I was talking about this with one of my coaching clients the other day around this idea of gratitude. And they struggled they were saying how they struggled with it because sometimes gratitude can feel like this, oh, do I need to sit down and journal about everything I'm thankful for every morning, and is that really going to do something for me? And there's lots of ways, right, to give gratitude and approaches. And I said, okay, well, that's not your way of doing it. But if you think about, connecting with people like we had just described as a way of, giving gratitude towards others, and then to your point, it eventually, a lot of times it comes back. And so we both were just talking through about how it was another nice way to think about that concept of gratitude.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's really challenging and it's tough out there to be a senior leader. If you're in the C-suite, you're the CEO, maybe you're leading technology initiatives, you're the CIO, CTO, CMO on the marketing side, sales leaders, everyone in that C-suite. It's hard, and there is this risk of burnout. It's very real that you talk about. You're helping people navigate through. What are some of the key drivers that are increasing that burnout risk today?
Yeah, so I talk about this 100% mindset. And that was where I was at when I was starting to experiencing burnout. And that's, this view of I have to work hard, I have to be busy, because that's how others are looking at me and potentially judging what I'm doing. I've got a to-do list I need to keep working on. um, for a lot of people, that idea of perfectionism, but also that fear of failure, and depending on the culture, the organization setup, is failure acceptable? Do you have that psychological safety? So those are some of the things that are in that, 100% mindset. And a lot of times people are putting the pressure on themselves when it might not be expected of others. There's certainly hard times where it can be, coming from the other side, but we almost have now treated everything at work as urgent and important. If you think about, the four matrix of urgency and importance. And a lot of times, if you respond to someone when they're asking for something, and you ask for a timeline, they might say, "Oh, I don't need it for another, week and a half," or, "Oh, actually, these are my expectations of what you need to do." But in our head, we're thinking, "I've got to do it this way, and I've got to do it immediately for them." And so we now treat every email or message that comes in with such immediacy. And I've heard people describe it in different workshops or sessions I've run where they almost they're proud of being busy. They're like, "Oh, I'm really good at being busy," and we've kind of made it this badge of honor in the workplace that it's great that I'm busy. But it's like, if you step back and think about what you're accomplishing, is that busyness equaling impact?
Yeah.
And that's what I think some people don't realize. And again, it that goes back to what's the culture? How is that measured? Because is busyness rewarded versus, um, true and impactful outcomes? I think the other thing too is digital work has definitely blurred boundaries. So I mentioned it earlier in terms of, it's so easy to be available, or to, potentially slip back into work all the time. The other thing too, and I ran into this, was you can almost forget that it's a person on the other end of that message, that email that you're sending. And if you think about your communications and what you're sending, it can sometimes help to remember, okay, is this the same way I would position this as if I was talking to them in person or having this conversation? Because sometimes we can fall into then that trap of, all this stuff needs to get done, and I'm just going to start, delegating out or telling or asking people, telling people, in our communications lose any type of, empathy, or just kind of the social aspect of, hi, how are you? How is it going, before I make this request. So I think the digital work has maybe had that impact as well. And I think the leaders, especially, they're under pressure to deliver results. And I don't think always organizations appreciate what space can do for leaders. So what I mean by that is leaders are shifting out of roles where they are doing all of the tasks and needing to have those skills of completing, everything that needs to get done. But what they're expected to do is look across their team and make connections and connect the dots, and think about the strategy, and tie what their area is doing to the rest of the organization. And to do that, you can't be in meetings and on calls all day, all the time. You need that space to be able to think strategically and to reflect on all of that. And I don't know that, sometimes that's always appreciated in a leadership role.
Yeah, I mean, we are just at this point of sensory overload. We're bombarded, we've got, and of course, everything is moving with us in our pocket because we've got these small devices. But between the Slack messages, email messages, text messages, um, meeting invite, Zoom, video engagement, but it can be overwhelming. And I always just thought, do we get to a point, because there's so much overload there, almost to where it's like an auto response? So even we're engaging, but are we putting the focus and the context there? It's almost like an auto immune response, to all of this just continuous incoming requests and stimulus.
Yeah, and I think that's where you've seen, especially post pandemic, and I've been very involved in the business travel world for a number of years, the increase in people wanting in person time, because they kind of want to break free from just always being, to your point, on that kind of autopilot, auto response. And they want to engage with people in person, and they want to do it in more experiential ways versus, hey, let's all get together in a conference room and go through a slide deck, but more,
Yeah.
let's be in different environments and ways we can collaborate.
Yeah. And something that a lot of the CEOs, the founders I've had conversations with, say is one of the hardest things that they have ever done is developing and then sustaining a healthy culture in their organizations. Where do you see culture coming into play in all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think leadership sets the tone. And if, as we've talked about all of these things, if leaders don't feel like they can find space to focus strategically, if they can set boundaries, if they can, be able to manage their time in a way they want to, the leaders need to be able to do that, to model that, to show to others okay, it's okay for you to do this as well. Thankfully, in one of my past organizations, I had a leader who was great about when they were on vacation and actually not responding and not
Yeah.
working. And so it took me a while, and a few vacations to kind of say, okay, I think I can do it, because she was the CEO. She was modeling that for the
Yes.
rest of us. And so I think, when that leadership team not only agrees that this is the type of culture you want, but actually how is it coming into the day to day, and the ways of working? What do they want to set as the tone, and then support people with? I think that absolutely helps, from a culture standpoint. And I think, when leaders can normalize that, recharging, finding time and space for curiosity is okay, then they're giving others, permission.
Yeah. So often, I think as leaders, we underestimate how closely our behaviors are being watched by our teams and inside the organization. And I view it as kind of being in that glass bubble at all times. And so there's nothing probably more deflating than when you take vacation and then your team sees that you aren't disconnecting at all. Because
Right.
because their fears, it stirs up all the negative fears about, oh, well, now I know what the expectations are in terms of my
Yes.
vacation. So yeah, it's powerful when you set that positive example.
Yep. It's just like our kids are always watching, and you realize, oh no, they're picking things up from me. It's the same in the workplace.
Yeah. Now, you've been really honest, Katie, and you've call yourself a recovering perfectionist, and now you're advocating for this 70% solution. Can you share a little bit more about what that is?
Sure. So, you mentioned the hockey background. I mentioned it as well. And what I talk about is how, there were some things I took from that time where I was always being told by coaches, you need to give 100%, you need to give 110%. And I think I carried that into my career, the workplace. We talked about, some of the actions that I certainly was following in terms of working hard, being busy, focusing on a to-do list. And I hit this point, and a leader of mine at the time recognized it, where she said, you're burning out because you're trying to operate at 100% all the time. And she said, why don't you try 70%? You'll be just as good. It's okay that you're not perfect. And I felt like it was one of those times where something really stuck. Someone said something that kind of made you sigh, that deep breath. And it was this, okay, she's saying it's okay. So let me try this 70%. And I started with one small step. I looked at my calendar and I saw that it was filled with meetings and calls. And anytime I ended something, I was immediately in emails, messages, or my to do list. And I saw the physical effects. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm barely taking deep breaths. It impacts sleep. The emotional effects. This is how I end up treating my family then after work is over, because I'm all, stressed out from this type of approach. And so I started by just putting a few blocks of time in my calendar to give myself those breaks. And what was great is, over time, it started to progress, because I realized, there's benefits. I'm starting to breathe better, sleep better. What else can I do within this time blocking that I was doing? Oh, I can read through communications that I'm sending to others to think, is this coming across in the right way? And so I just continued to build on it. I talked to others about it, and heard so many others having this, struggle as well, and trying to think about what would they do. So I developed this 70% framework, and there's 3 steps to it. It's based on discovering your purpose, defining your values, and then determining the actual behaviors that you want to put in place. Because that's the thing, right? You could say you have this specific purpose, these values, but what are you actually going to do on a day-to-day basis? And so now I use that framework, and I try to explain, listen, some people shy away from the 70% concept because it's and I get it, right? I'm that recovering perfectionist. It's really hard to let go of that 100%. It's not that you won't ever be full on operating at 100%. I'm headed to a conference in a few days, and it's going to be full on all day into the evening. But what I know is, okay, I'm going to be doing that for, a good part of a week. I'm going to have block time and be ready for when I get back to recharge.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything, and that's over a few days, or it might be, gosh, I've got a really busy day ahead of me. Where can I put in, a few breaks to try to recharge? So it's thinking more about, and I'm a runner, so I like to use the word pace. Like, what's your strategic pace? Because sometimes it is going to be fast, but where are the other times that you can slow down? And how can you strategically use those? What are the ways that you best recharge? Is it getting outside, taking a walk? Is it journaling? Is it meditating? Like, what are those things that re-energize you, in knowing what those are? So that's what the 70% kind of mindset and then framework are about.
Yeah, I wrote two words down as you were describing that, and it's self-awareness. Seems like there's a foundation of just having to have some introspection to get that perspective to be able to put this into action.
Yeah, I truly believe that, especially as a leader, if you are not finding ways to best take care of yourself, you're not going to show up the best for others. I mean, if you think about it, and the people you follow, do you want to follow someone that's busy and burned out, or someone that knows why they're doing what they're doing and is putting in place, the right behaviors to follow that?
Yeah, it's almost like this magnetic force. You're drawn to it
Mm-hmm.
because of what example and perspective that they're sharing, and the vulnerability too, to say, hey, maybe I'm a recovering perfectionist too, but there's a better way, and I'm
Yes.
living that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
What else, Katie, do you think separates truly exceptional leadership from just good enough?
So one of the things I touched on a little bit there, but I'll share a bit more. I think this piece around knowing your why, knowing your purpose, because I was caught in that focus of titles. It was, okay, where do I want to be in the next 5 years? Well, what title sounds right, and what leadership title do I want? And then, as I talked about earlier, went through that realization of, I need to know why I'm doing what I want to do. I mean, I was just recently this year in this opportunity to expand my leadership, to be on this CEO track, and to increase my responsibility in those I led. But when I reflected and thought about it, I thought the reason I would go after that and continue to do that was probably more for the title rather than what truly is my purpose and driver, which has led to the coaching, in focusing more on this entrepreneurial path. There's a great concept. It's called Ikigai. If you Google it, you'll be able to find the framework, and that's what I used when I really wanted to step back and think about purpose, because it's got 4 key questions that you can answer around knowing what you're good at, what does the world need, what is it that you love, and what can you be paid for, and really thinking through these concepts to understand what's your purpose, your why. So I think that's a foundational piece for exceptional leadership is to know that, be able to live that out, to share that. The other piece that I like to share with leaders, and it's a part of some of the coaching that I do, is knowing how to utilize what I call pace, space, and grace. So how do you have that right pace? As I mentioned, when do you find that space in your day? And when do you give yourself and others grace? And so I think thinking through those components can help you with that broader thinking of, okay, how am I taking care of myself to then be a better leader to others?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And giving grace to ourselves first, and then yes, it's kind of like put the oxygen mask on first before helping
Mhm.
others, and we're going to give ourselves grace as leaders, and then we can extend that and really get people feeling more comfortable about giving grace to themselves.
Yeah, and that goes back to that fear of failure I mentioned earlier. So if you have that, or if people on your team are feeling that, and that grace is not present, it's really going to limit what can be achieved.
Katie, what's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
So I had the advice from a leader one time to not be cardboard Katie. And what they meant by that, and it was in a very positive, constructive feedback way, was I had really been trying to fit a persona, fit a role, fit expectations. And it was then causing me to not show much of my personality. That wasn't coming across when I was presenting. It wasn't with a lot of energy. I was trying to fit this expectation of what I thought was expected. And that kind of hit home with me to say, okay, if someone's seeing that, if I'm have that personifying that, then I really need to step back. And they also then followed up with, who do you want brand Katie to be? And that's when I started to dive more into that purpose, values, what is it that encapsulates who I am, and how do I bring that in the best way to work? So that was another reminder for me that, people don't connect to this idea of perfection that I think I was trying to personify, that they connect to real people and they connect to their stories. I made more connections with people now that I've shared my failures than when I was trying to focus more on just only showing the achievements. So, going through that transition was definitely a big change for me.
Yeah, I've had this concept in my mind for some time now, and I see it play out, which is authenticity travels. I mean, in the sense that
Mhm.
when you go in and you're building a new relationship, or you're reinforcing an existing one, evolving one, that there's this thing about just being authentic, even with all of the imperfections, that really just people appreciate and gets you to a whole nother level in terms of a meaningful, trusted relationship.
Yeah, and the other piece about those imperfections, I was speaking to a group the other day, and I brought up a picture of the game Shoots and Ladders, which I'm sure many of us
Oh, yeah.
remember either playing, or have to play it with your kids. But I don't know why this came to mind. I think I was playing with one of my kids, and if you think about it, we're all frustrated when we hit that shoot, right? When we hit that challenge, when we hit a failure. But in that game, sometimes going down those chutes then end up leading to a bigger ladder that get you even further ahead. And so I was using it as a concept to say, if we don't take the time, if we don't slow our pace to look at those failures and challenges, the chutes we go down, and see where's the next ladder, then we might miss it. So, I think that's something to keep in mind.
For sure. You bring it back. Oh, so many memories. Family time, playing that game. It's
Yes.
wonderful. When you think about the future, what makes you optimistic?
I am encouraged by how many more leaders I am seeing who are talking about energy and mental health and moving away from this idea of busyness, and who see it not just as it's a topic we should discuss, but how can we use it as a strategy. I think that's been spurred, certainly by more people wanting meaningful work. And I know McKinsey's done studies on it about the percentage of people who are now looking at not just jobs, but how do they find meaning in their work.
Yes.
And I think too, with some of the newer generation, who's kind of pushing back on saying, I'm not just getting into the workforce looking for a job to pay the bills. I want to do something that's meaningful. And there's a futurist, her name's Heather McGowan. She has some great information she shares about how we've entered this human capital era. So we've kind of shifted away from just this focus on shareholder value. And so many organizations are starting to realize it's our people, it's our humans that are going to, bring the value to our company, to our customers, and we need to invest in them, and in what that looks like. So, that gives me optimism about, hopefully what will continue then to change in the workplace.
Do you have any other final advice for leaders that are looking to create more positive impact and elevate the performance of their teams?
So I think in closing, I'll talk about energy and what energizes you and what drains you. So through going through, my own journey, and thinking about the 70% framework, I now think about across, physical, mental, and social aspects, what gives me energy and what drains me, and how can I address some of those things that are draining. So maybe it's your next one-on-one you have with someone on your team or a team meeting. Ask them, why they enjoy the work they do, and are there things that energize but also drain them, and how can you together try to address some of those draining areas. I think that can be questions that maybe lead to a different conversation.
Yeah. I mean, that back to that self-awareness and really asking the hard questions of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and really, again, helping yourself first. And then you're going to take your team to a whole nother level. Katie, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for sharing your story, the reminder of not falling into the perfectionist trap. And then there is this 70% solution, the 70% mindset that just might be the key to avoid burning out. Really loved our conversation.
Yes, thank you, Dan.
And a reminder, please continue to give the gift of feedback to help make this podcast even better. You can do that by going out and giving a rating and a review. It's so easy to do on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And as always, make sure to visit marketimpactnow.com for the latest in business leadership perspectives. So long until next time.